So I was reading an article in the Jamaica Gleaner, um, attorney Bert Samuels declaring that the 1838 Emancipation Act was a scam. He described it as a scam document. And so I decided to actually take a look at the actual declaration and realize that we're still teaching terrible history to our people. And even the celebration today in 2026 is not accurately reflecting the history of the document. So, for example, we claim this year that we're celebrating the 188th year of the Emancipation Declaration. When I read the document, the Emancipation Declaration in 1838 was not emancipation of freedom. It was the emancipation termination of the Apprenticeship Act on August 1, 1838. That the actual Declaration of Freedom, quote unquote, was in 1833, and the British Parliament then provided for 20 million pounds to be paid to the landowners, reparation. And the landowners raised hell to say that they needed time, more time. And so the British, this is where I agree with Bert Samuel that it is a fraud document. It is not, it's a hoax, so to speak, because what the British Parliament and politicians then did to accommodate the landowners who said they needed more time to adjust, even though they were being paid reparation. What the British Parliament did was to declare a period of apprenticeship. So these formerly enslaved persons would now work for free still as apprentice on these plantations. Not only did they do that, but the argument in the British Parliament and among the class that were freeing the enslaved persons is that the formerly enslaved needed time to adjust to their freedom. So they had to learn how to become free. And so in enacting legislation, for example, as they made the declaration, they came up with vagrancy laws to suggest they were basically warning the former enslaved persons that one, they need to be meaningfully employed. They informed them that the houses that they were living in, those whole houses were not theirs, but they were owned by the plantation owners, that they would be charged with vagrancy if they were unemployed and seen out on the street. And the alternative to that, of course, was to work for their former masters, and then they'd have to pay rent for their dwellings, and they'd get a little plot to plant. And so it was indentured servitude after the emancipation. But I guess the critical point I'm making here is that one, that 1838 August 1 was not Emancipation Declaration. It was the termination of apprenticeship, and that the declaration was actually made back in 1833, and there was this 4 years of apprenticeship, basically additional free labor after the so-called freedom of the enslaved persons. And to buttress Bert Samuels, the attorney's argument that it's a sham document, the truth is the only reason they terminated this apprenticeship program is because of the agitation of locals, and hence the formerly enslaved people were free. They were still in bondage on a servitude, and those that dared to walk away from those plantations were then being arrested as vagrants. All and every one of the persons who on the first day of August 1834 shall be holden in slavery within such British colony as aforesaid shall upon and from and after the said 1st of August 1834 become and be to all intents and purposes free and discharged of and from all manner of slavery, and shall be absolutely redeemed, and that the children thereafter be born to any such persons shall be free at birth. Now, the 1833 Act created a period of unpaid apprenticeship, and it resulted in massive civil resistance and public pressure. And so the local colonial legislative amendment led to the total termination of apprenticeship on August 1, 1838. So I think the Jamaican government and the schools and the colleges and universities should start, I mean, after almost 200 years, we should start teaching the accurate history. The 1838 Act was not the emancipation of slavery. It was the freedom from the unjust apprenticeship that had lasted for 4 years since the 1833 Act that was enacted in 1834 that claimed that formerly enslaved people were freed, but then were tied to this apprenticeship program that they were not being paid for. We really need to teach accurate history. 1838 was not the emancipation of slavery. The Act of 1833 claimed the emancipation, but we still had. So we need to talk about that 4-year period and what it was, and say it like Bert Samuel said, it's a fraud document, with this claim and affirmation. So this is what the guy said in 1838. He said, termination of apprenticeship. All predial and non-predial apprentice laborers were immediately and unconditionally discharged from any remaining terms of apprenticeship. Absolute freedom. All formerly enslaved individuals were declared fully free citizens under the British Crown, entitled to full civil rights and freedom of movement, peace and industry. And the proclamation also called upon the newly freed population. Listen this. This says we're, like we say, it's a real fraud document. It says the proclamation upon the newly freed population were to maintain order, to engage in peaceful labor for wages, and observe the law as equal subject. And I want to talk about the Emancipation Declaration of the United States, also a parallel situation, also a scam document that came a little later. There was a preliminary Emancipation Proclamation issued on September 22, 1862, and the final Emancipation Proclamation took effect in January 1868. And listen what this, 1863. Listen what this fraud document, these British colonizers, they had taught their subjects well, because even though they weren't in America, in the United States of America anymore, they still operated under the same kind of guise. So this is what you should know about the United States Proclamation. It did not immediately free all enslaved people in the United States. Instead, it declared free those enslaved in states that were in rebellion against the Union. So slavery in the US actually remained legal in local border states until the adoption of the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution in December 1865. So again, these people create these sham documents, make declarations, and yet nothing is real at the time of the declaration until after. In the case of Jamaica, they made the declaration in 1864. It took 4 years when people were still basically working for nothing as apprentices before the 1838 declaration of freedom from the apprenticeship program. And then in the United States, it's 1862 that they had the preliminary reading and declaration with the final proclamation in 63. But only slaves in states that were in rebellion against the Union were actually freed. And it wasn't until 1865, the 13th Amendment, that the slaves were actually freed. And we know that Texas still found time or found it convenient to delay the time. Hence, we have Juneteenth, June 19th, like at the time when people in Texas were hearing that the slaves were freed. So I agree with Bert Samuels, the Jamaican attorney, that the Jamaican document is a fraud document, a fallacy. And I'll say the same thing about the United States document. And again, Africans are asking for reparations now, and people in the diaspora. Those plantation owners got their reparation right away. They got their reparation and some, because they asked for reparation, they got it. Then they asked for time, and they also got it. So I guess the question is, where is the 40 acres and the mule? I'm out.